Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining this week's EDC, Clallam EDC Coffee Chat. We are honored and excited to have Regan Nichols join us today. She is the new superintendent of the Sequim Schools District, and from what I understand, has a lot of big plans for the school district. And I think everybody needs to get on board and support her in every way we can so that we can make the school system in Sequim and beyond as positive a learning environment as possible. Just a few housekeeping details before we get started. I ask that you put yourself on mute so we don't inadvertently pick up any background noise. And if you have any questions, please either raise your hand and I'll call on you, or Regan can. Alternatively, you can put your question in the chat, and if you would like me to ask the question. So with that, Regan, we'd love to hear about first your background, and then also, your vision for the Sequim School District and things like what do you see are your biggest challenges and where are your greatest opportunities? So with that, Regan, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. I appreciate the introduction and the invitation to be here this morning. I really look forward to meeting you all via Zoom. And if there are folks on the call that have perhaps met me out at a different venue, say hi this morning. I'd love to see you again. So just to give you a bit of background, I am a native of Maine and ended up experiencing Washington for the first time back in 1995. My husband was stationed out of the Bangor subbase, and we lived in Bremerton for 10 years. During that time, I worked for the Bremerton School District, and at the end of my husband's career with the Navy, we decided retirement should end up back in Maine because we wanted our parents to be grandparents for our children. And so we headed on back, and we are now newly empty nesters. So we've come full circle and decided that we had loved our time in Washington and wanted to return. Here was this opportunity in Sequim that presented itself, and it's all worked out. So what I'd say to you is that I've had experience back in Maine as, of course, a teacher, a school principal for 16 years, assistant superintendent of finance and operations for 3 years, and then superintendency following that. And as I come to you, I've been through a lot of stages of an educational career that's taught me a lot about the investment that small towns and cities make in education, not to mention states and the federal government, and what the expectations are for a return on investment. And I want to talk about some of that today with you because I think the intersection between economic development and education cannot be understated. And the research in economics shows us that, but I don't think we always talk about it that straight up, because sometimes education can be a softer environment, we'll say. But I think I really want to be a bridge for these discussions, because it is true that education done well with high quality assurance leads to incredible economic advantage. So we'll get to that in a moment. I'd like to talk to you about the enrollment right now in Sequim schools. And I know many of you may have local or residential interests in other districts, but for us, our enrollment is slightly up. And that is, of course, good news, because that means we have community confidence in returning to school. And we are seeing an interest in the lower grades of parents being back in public school. The COVID effect did find parents finding some alternatives, and we still are finding that is the case. Folks have learned that education can come in different packages, and it isn't always necessarily in the public school walls. What I'd like to say to you is that we all know that the funding ingredients for schools rely almost solely on enrollment. And so for us to continue to build that will be an advantage to us and to everyone who benefits from workforce development.
And then I'm going to get that scanned
Sorry.
too, but you just keep listening away.
There we go.
So what do I see for the schools coming through the years to come? I think it's critically important that we talk about a term that I call desirability. What I'm hearing from the listening tours I've been doing, I've done 4 listening sessions, and I've been out to countless other groups to do talks like this. And what I'm realizing is that there are folks walking away from public school choice, sometimes in Sequim specifically, because they look at us from the outside and they're not seeing what they believe are attributes of a quality educational experience. Well, I've got to say that we do have facilities that don't necessarily look modernized. And with the recent concerns that have come in Sequim anyway, we've had talks in the community about some safety and security issues. I can see where people might make that assumption. But I also want to assure you that you can have the shabbiest looking building, but have amazing teachers and students sitting inside of it. And the programming is rich and is coming to fruition. But I also think we need to be results focused and really look at ourselves as a school system and say, where can we grow and better ourselves? And in Sequim, I think we have needs around all those things. We need to look at facilities. We need to attract folks to want to say yes to enrolling with us. And then we need to look that our quality assurance is really showing in the results. So those things are very important to me. And I know that they probably are to you too, because growing the factors that will help with workforce and also help with folks coming here to start entrepreneurial or professional endeavors, very important. So I think that we need to recognize education is the pathway for students to either A, give back very productively to their community, or at least to society. And we have a lot of students from Sequim who go through our educational K-12 experience and leave. I've talked to a lot of folks who have an interest that we have our students stay. And I'll tell you, I'm in the middle. I think sometimes what we need to recognize is there should be development. So we do have students who desire to stay to do so and go right to career from school. That would be great. We also have Peninsula College right on our doorstep. We could be making sure that we're accessing as much as possible in that venue. But we also do want students who are ready to seek other opportunities to head out, get well developed from those experiences, such as college, university experiences, internships, and other places, and bring those expertise levels back to us. And being someone who did just that, I left Maine very early at age 18 and ended up coming back and brought my expertise with me. So there is room for all of that development. The conditions for building capacity in the school are interesting in Washington. You have a state that's very, very committed to educational funding. And what I've learned in my short time, so what I'm about to say is short timer information. What I've seen so far is that we've got a state commitment that's pretty significant. Our ability to localize support for something like infrastructure development bonds, getting levies passed, much more challenging. And what my hope is that we put the pedal to the metal around developing the local side confidence that the school district will be good stewards of any funding that is granted to it, is responsive in a way that develops the school system so that it is desirable from the outside and from the inside product, and that our results are strong enough that people will have confidence to move forward in that way. And it does come down to the chicken or the egg syndrome, I call it. because sometimes we need funding before we're able to show all those results. So I'm really interested today in hearing some comments and perspectives from all of you around what it would take to grow the confidence of the local side so that we are garnering the support we need to promote the workforce development that you're all interested in, of course, the facilities development, so we get the desirability factor from folks moving in who might choose Sequim or the Peninsula region as their home. And how do we make sure that the results are communicated to you in a fair and expeditious manner so you have confidence? I will also share with you that I think our school system is ready from an internal point that I've heard. They really want to make the difference for students, but also for the community so that we're growing together. So that's good news. So I'll pause there and take any perspectives or questions, and then I have some more things to share as we close out.
Great, thank you. I guess I'll kick it off since I don't see anyone's hands raised yet. So you said the enrollment has gone up. Is that relative to pre-COVID or last year?
That's relative to last year.
Okay.
And that's a great point to make, Colleen, because last year is still just trying to gain ground back to the pre-COVID levels. So we have a lot of work to do to get back to those numbers.
And what's the total student population in the school district?
We're at 2,552 students.
Okay. Okay. Oh, and I see Dr. Ames has her hand raised, the new president of Peninsula College. Susie?
Thanks, Colleen. Good morning, Regan. It's nice to meet you. I know my assistant and your assistant are talking to try to find time on our super busy schedules, but welcome to the community. I'm just right behind you, just having arrived pretty much on the same day, probably. So looking forward to working with you. I definitely agree with you that we need to figure out the right pathway for each individual student, and there's no one right answer. So look forward to partnering with you on that. In that tone, I think most of us on the call can agree a four-year degree is not right for everybody. And so how do we create those pathways for technical education? And so on that note, can you talk about the Skills Center and how the community can help with that?
Fantastic. And thank you for bringing that to the forefront. That's definitely one of the subjects I wanted to be sure we discussed today. A Career and Technical Center of Excellence is on the minds of our board of directors here in Sequim. We recognize that we have many students who are interested in career and technical opportunities, very interested in trade and having that development be in their high school experience rather than waiting until they depart, and great support from our board of directors to start a working group to discover what a career and technical center of excellence could look like here in Sequim. We also have some wonderful partnership with several of you on this call to forward what grant opportunities, funding opportunities are already present, so that we can forward this idea sooner rather than later. So Ned Flater, our OPA principal and career and technical director, has been working full tilt to try to develop a schematic of how the programming could intersect with a new facility that would allow us to actually put the equipment that we've already secured into working order, because right now we just don't have the facilities for it, and then develop further programming that is most immediately needed to meet workforce needs right here in our region. So next week, we plan to launch this work group, and the way that you can help us, two ways. You can be listening for folks from the work group who come out and are asking for ideas about how the development could work best, but also matching funds. We're in the process right now of looking to find $1 million in matching funds so that we can access up to 15 million, which is a gift.
Great, thank you. So I typically look at OSPI's report cards where it shows information about school districts. And I'm guessing those bars are pretty high because so many of the school districts don't meet what we would think of as a passing grade, I guess. And I read recently how in Oregon, the mean scores for students that were passing in the state of Oregon, that were passing the math and science and reading ESA type tests dropped from, just below 50 down to a number in the 20s. And so if you don't mind, I did pull it up. I want to share the screen and show Sequim School District's report card. And granted, of course, this is prior to you arriving. I'm not even sure which year this represents. I was just trying to look here. But as you can see, we definitely have some room for improvement. Oh, I'm jumping around here. Sorry about that. So the ELA standards, I think I called them ESA. Only 52. So this is school year 2021 to 2022. About 53% past that. And that ELA, what does that stand for, Regan?
English language arts.
Okay, so English, basically, math, dismal 40%, and science 43%, and 89% graduated in 4 years, which I think that's actually up from where it was. And so obviously, this isn't an ideal metric, but it's what you've inherited, and it's also based on the school district dealing with clearly less than ideal an environment where kids are having to learn online, and you've got kids that have different learning styles, and it doesn't meet that. The public health emergency proclamations and mandates didn't meet their needs. So I guess my question involved with all of this, are you hopeful that you'll be able to make a big impact in those kind of scores? And are you planning on doing that through different kind of curriculum, or inspiring your workforce, your teachers, or what's your plan regarding that path?
Well, I appreciate you bringing this up, because as I spoke to you earlier in my introduction this morning, results matter, and being focused on it is only fair as an accountability system to a lot of different groups, you all included, but also to our students themselves. They're spending an incredible amount of time being invested with us as a system. They deserve to feel like there's a guarantee I'm going to come out and have the skills I need to succeed. So first, I'm going to say, we've already started working on this. I don't just hope it, Colleen. I know there's going to be a change. And the reason I feel so certain about that is that you have to make a decision in any organization you run about, is there a will issue or a skill issue? Mm-hmm. And so far in my interviews with staff, my time with my administrative team, we have a strong will. So I know the inspiration will be there from people themselves. But I also think we've got to develop the skill sets for us to be attentive to the things that matter. The curriculum that's in place is quite strong in Sequim. I'd want you all to know that. They've made some solid investment in curriculum. We need to be sure that we know how to use it. And that is professional development focused leadership right there. So we're going to make sure we're investing in that place. Secondly, we need to make sure that the curriculum, although it's strong, is being presented in a way that engages students. And I was asked recently at a prior engagement about a differential between achievement of girls and boys. And Susie, around Peninsula College, I think I heard your enrollment is heavy on the female side right now. And the truth is, we do have to re-engage boys. And that will come from different strategies of how we teach. So it's not so much an issue of what we teach, it's how we present it and make sure that the students are engaged to use it and pull down what they need to. So we're working on that. It's called instructional strategy professional development. I've actually had the administrative team take these very results, Colleen, and say to them, it's the law of averages. You can have averages show many, many things, but I want to know about the swing. And what I'd want you all to understand is we have some incredibly high performing teachers, students. We also have the opposite in some places. And so we're going to have to make sure we're getting the quality assurance in there. We don't want some classrooms or some students to have one experience and others have another. We need to get a quality assurance line moving so that you pretty well can guarantee this is what you're going to get out of 7th grade math, 3rd grade ELA, 12th grade science. It's going to be a few years in the making, but I think we'll make progress this year alone, just because we're attentive and mindful about it.
Mm-hmm. So another question is about homelessness. I see that in the chat. A few years ago, and this was Rebecca Miller's question, a few years ago, there were close to 200 students reported being homeless. I guess that's through McKinney-Vento. And can you speak to that? I know that doesn't necessarily mean they're on the streets, but, and do you know those current numbers?
I don't know the exact number. I did just meet with our McKinney-Vento liaison named Marin Packer. Some of you may know her from different volunteer opportunities and so forth, but I think it is about 162 right now. I will say that the definition of homelessness is changing, and actually the terms we're using are changing too. We have students that have this code, even if they are currently living with someone who is not their parent or guardian. So you might live with a grandparent, for instance, and have a home that you go to every single night, and you're actually well supported in that home, but it is not considered to be with your parent or guardian. You're not under guardianship with your grandparent. So you are considered to be in a McKinney-Vento homeless qualified status. One thing that's really important to know is that we are attentive to this list and make sure that, of course, students that are truly homeless on the streets or in a car, that we are helping these students to find resources. But we also want to turn our attention to providing support to the caregivers of students that may not be under permanent guardianship. Because of course, it's a challenge sometimes to have those relationships develop, have the students feel that there's permanency, and we want to reduce the stress and increase the resource levels. So yes, we are dealing with high numbers, but I appreciate that you brought up the definition is far-reaching.
Mm-hmm. So what's near and dear to my heart is that group of kids that seems to fall into the middle, where you've got, 20, 25, maybe 30% of the kids have parents that, are making sure they're doing homework and are talking to them about college and really supporting their educational needs and create an expectation for them. And then you've got the kids at, maybe 10% of the kids that struggle the most and that maybe have special needs. And it seems that our state has created very good support systems for them. But then you have this middle 60% or so that maybe it's a one-parent household, maybe the parent didn't feel education was critical for their upbringing, and they certainly attend school, but they don't have a lot of direction. I know the state has gone through Core 24 and just all sorts of iterations for career pathways and that kind of thing. But it to me, it really comes down to the school, the high school, having a particular teacher take real interest in a student. And then, of course, also counselors, but I don't know how many counselors you have at the high school. Is there some way that you can create the structure to make sure every single one of those students that doesn't have a clear plan can create one and feels good, you know, maybe by the start of their senior year, like, here's my plan going forward, and that kind of thing. I know that's so much easier said than done. I had a son that had no idea what he wanted to do until, you know, mid senior year. So and it was a real, you know, challenge to try to help him figure that out. And I'd like to think I was in that top 25% or so that, you know, was like, yeah, you're going, you know, and we're going to make sure you're successful. But what are your plans regarding, you know, getting into every single kid so that they have a plan and a pathway to get into the kind of job or career or, you know, whatever that looks like after they graduate?
Okay, well, there's a lot packed inside there. So
Yeah.
let's take it apart. First of all, I'd want to share, let's talk about, you used the term 60%. The 60% in the middle actually have very diverse educational experiences. And much of it often comes down to personal levels of responsibility, motivation, ambition. We also know we have a significant number of students who are going through education right now with quite an apathetic approach. This is being done to me. It's not mine to necessarily grab and take initiative. So I actually would say, although we think about high school being this critical time of decision-making, I would say to you, middle school is the place where we have to start the investment in students building engagement, so much so that they feel self-confidence, self-esteem, because think of us in our own trajectories to success. We didn't come out of high school knowing exactly what seat we have right now. We didn't know that. But we came out with a sense of ourselves that we could accomplish, do things, dare to take a risk, and imagine ourselves in a different place than we were a year earlier. I think those types of attributes are best developed in middle school because it is such a critical developmental stage for not only cognitive development, but emotional development. How do I think that could happen? Mentorship. I actually have a book that I read more than probably twice in 5-year spans called Inevitable. And it talks about how you could have mentorship opportunities where they're actually counselor types, but they are meeting with kids from 6th grade on up until they are seniors, and they are developing those plans from an early age. What I would say to you is, we talk about volunteerism, and I am completely in support of developing volunteerism, but you really need to make the investment in schools, having these be paid positions that have that, they imagine going into the future and develop with students as they need to be. Our high school currently has 3 counselors. We've just done a reconfiguration. One of the counselors is going to be entirely devoted to career development. This will be a position that focuses heavily on the senior class. So they are departing with some degree of plan, as you talk about, Colleen. But I also think sometimes we overemphasize that students should be making these choices. What I hope we do is give students a menu and give them a list of possibilities, because we all know students are going to college and not always finishing, or starting a trade or training for a trade and not finishing, and then they don't have anything. I'd rather have kids with a menu and have the students thinking about what attributes or aptitudes do I have that are matches. Let's try some of these things on during high school and then have a better informed choice. So you're more successful heading into a commitment of education for your future.
Mhm. With all of the new technology that's coming out, you know, if you're going to work on a car, I've heard Senator Lisa Wellman talk about this frequently, or if you're going to work on today's automobiles, or if whether you're in the trades or in a field that hasn't necessarily been associated with technology, technology now is frequently a component. And how does the school district, how do you envision infusing those skill sets so that all children, when they graduate, will be able to engage with the appropriate technology? Do you feel like you have a class curriculum set up that meets those needs currently for tomorrow's needs?
What I'd say to you is that I've had this question before, and I actually think we have a level of saturation with technology. We are putting technology in front of students. They are distracted by technology in their lives every single day. Now, this saturation does have some lemonade to come out of the lemons, and that is students feel very comfortable with utilizing technology that comes to them. The platforms change all the time that they're using, whether it's just for education or for social media, for instance. I know you're speaking about very specialized technology, for instance, automotive, but what I'll tell you is it's the skill set we need them to have to take risks, be adaptable, be willing to try new things, understand that technology continues to adapt and move. And I think they have the comfort and the confidence to invest in that type of a realm. You can't predict what technology is going to come in the next 25 years, much less even 5 years. So I think us building those perseverance type mindsets that you need to have that comfort with technology is the important side. And I think they have it. I don't think that's what we really need to be worried about. I think it's foundational skills, citizenship skills, communication skills that we need to be focusing on a bit more.
So you mentioned that technology, specifically maybe social media, is a distraction. Is that a distraction in the classroom for most teachers? What is the school district policy? Can they have their phones out and text someone or do something on Snapchat during a classroom presentation, or what are those rules?
We just came up with a renewed commitment in September for cell phone use. And we have a policy in our district that does not allow cell phones to be out in the classroom unless a teacher is requesting it for an educational purpose. So we've renewed to what we call off and away. Cell phones will be turned off and put away during the school day. We actually had staff asking us to renew our commitment to our policy because it was such a distraction. We decided not to ban cell phones because we have so many parents telling us that they need to be able to get to their students through that communication method for messages and so forth. But we've found that it's incredibly distracting to students. I cannot tell you enough, if you are a teacher, what it's like. You are experiencing students having buzzing, vibration, dings going off, because all of these platforms are trying to bring the user back, always competing for that attention span. It's too much. And we've said enough is enough. And we've also said to our staff, we adults need to do the same thing. So I think what I'm hearing is thumbs up so far.
Well, that's great. That's great to hear. So I see Brian Koo, who's a former school board member, had a question. Brian, do you want to ask that?
Sure. Thank you. And Regan, I'm looking forward to meeting you, and already a big fan of the work you're doing here.
Thank you.
What did you hear recently regarding the proactive community outreach around safety and security at the schools? And thank you, by the way, for doing that.
Heard loud and clear that the community expectation is that we are proactive with our facilities improvements that will be prioritizing safety, and that there is an expectation that parents feel that there is surveillance on campus, that we have high procedural training in place so that our staff feels confident in leading in a time of crisis. Also hearing that there is expectation that we have students having experience so they feel confident in what they would do in the time of an emergency. And then an overall emphasis of the priority of communication. They really do expect that schools have strong communication so that parents feel more confident about what is happening, and that they will have a degree of transparency when something does go wrong so that they understand what's being followed. While I agree with all of those priorities that the community brought to us, what I will say, some of it's challenging because society has an expectation that transparency means everybody knows everything all at once, and it can't be done. And I'm here to say, I'm not sure it always should be done. There is a place for an organization to have a degree of confidentiality around what procedures are so that they're not out there for everyone to know, including the perpetrator. Secondly, sometimes you want your schools paying very close attention to what's being done internally to manage something, and the communication out is not as important as the communication inside. We're being tested as an organization to manage the demands that this instantaneous gratification of communication is for everyone. And I know you all know that, but we're trying our best to meet more than in the middle, really give parents what they need to feel confident. But we're also moving very quickly right now on a surveillance upgrade. We have an interim solution we hope to have in hopefully by Christmas break.
So I saw that you had some senior leadership positions, principal, that kind of thing open. Have those slots now been filled? And can you share a little bit about the folks that you've hired?
Sure, thank you. Yes, we have filled all of our administrative slots. So at the high school, we have 2 new administrators. We have Erin Fox, who was the assistant principal. She's now moved into the principal seat, and she is a graduate of Sequim High School herself. So it's great to have alumni in our positions. Casey Lanning is the assistant principal, and he's been with Sequim School District in different capacities for about 5 years. So he is strong in his professional development capability. So what I spoke to earlier about how we're going to develop instructional strategies, he is an expert at that. At our elementary school, we have a new assistant principal, Robbie Fox at Grey Wolf, and he's from Idaho. And his expertise is in restorative justice as a discipline and problem-solving pathway. And he's done that mostly with secondary students. So we're going to be relying on him to help us with students who are not engaging as behaviorally as we would like, and really move us to improving the culture, because cultural improvements will lead to performance improvements. There's no doubt about that. And then we also have, let me see here, middle school's the same. Donna Hudson moved from principal of Grey Wolf into the teaching and learning director seat here at central office. And I can't say enough about that when we talk about performance improvement, because she and I have been studying these results, and we're talking right now about mapping how we improve the professional development plan. And she's actually hired a couple of new professional development folks internally to help us do that.
Well, speaking of professional development, if you would like me to connect you with any of these local experts, I know there's Career Tech Education, but beyond that, as the advisory committee, but beyond that, just please let me know and I'll do my best there. Colleen Robinson, the Executive Director of Habitat for Humanity and one of our board members, has a question. Colleen?
Good morning, Regan. Good to see you. Can you all hear me? Okay, good. So I had 5 children go through the Sequim School District, and it was a different experience with each and every one of the 5. I actually have a 2-part question. First of all, teaching to the test. So much emphasis put on outcomes of student testing that then reflect on teachers' evaluations. And I may be misinformed, but Erin Fox, who I've worked with, she's wonderful, worked with her on a couple of different projects through the school district. Has she ever taught in a classroom, or did she simply come in through the counseling path? And will she be evaluating teachers as principal if she hasn't had that experience of teaching in a classroom? Thank you.
Okay, I'll take your second question first. It is true that Erin Fox has the background of being a guidance counselor at the high school. And so, yes, she will be evaluating teachers. And what I can tell you is we do a lot of work, and the state of Washington requires that anyone who's going to be evaluating teachers go through professional development of how you do use the state tool for evaluating teachers, and that it is required that you have understanding of how that framework works, what observations should be prioritizing. And the beautiful thing for Erin is that she has Casey Lanning, her assistant principal, who's an expert in this, who will also be working side by side with her with evaluating also. So I think together they will make quite a team. And sometimes I say to folks, I've observed teachers who teach Spanish, French, Latin, for instance. I cannot speak any of those languages. Unfortunately, I'm not proud of that. And what I would say to you is, it's not critical that I know how to teach Latin. What's critical is that I know what good teaching looks like, and that I'm able to distill those elements and have a good conversation with the teacher to develop the teacher's own reflection and expertise. That's where it's at. Mm-hmm. So back to your first question about teaching to the test. Teaching to the test sounds bad, but I'm here to say to you that teaching to the test has a place, because if you and I could all take the Smarter Balanced Assessment, which is the state test, together, you would be so impressed if students could do well on that test. And what does well mean? Well, well doesn't mean 100. The percentages of performance on these tests, we really strive to say 80% of our students meeting the mark on these tests would be very, very strong performance. They are absolutely amazing examples of how students could have applicable skills, because we just want students who can take their learning and use it on the outside. So I tell teachers, there's a place to get students comfortable with what types of questions are going to come out on these tests, because the questions are great. And if you can do well on those questions, and it's not just the literal question, it's just the thinking you need to persist with problem solving on these tests, critical thinking on these tests, it's not all bad. Do I think your course should be all about going over practice questions every week? No. We want the content. We want students to be able to engage in learning methods that are important in a certain content area. But there is a place to learn how to critically think, show your thinking, communicate how you got to an answer, understand there are many ways to get to an answer. And I think that the Smarter Balanced Assessment actually allows it. It's just incredibly rigorous. I don't think rigor is a bad thing. Matter of fact, I'm all for it.
Regan, I have one more follow-up question, and that is Sequim Option School, that used to be called the Alternative High School. Our Rotary Club works with those students. One of my children was actually one of those students. And I'm just wondering where those students that are in high school that are taking longer to graduate, where that program fits in your mind, and how could my Rotary Club best support Teacher Thorson, if he's still the teacher, and those students?
So I have to say, Colleen, that I have not had a chance to go talk with the folks involved in that program yet, but I am such a strong supporter of alternative education. That's what I call it. And I like the name alternative because the typical approach to schooling does not work for everyone. And what we're trying to do is give students success in the moment that they need it, in the package in which they need it. And so I would say I'm completely a proponent of continue to keep students engaged in school. Education is the way to having your economic success as a lifelong learner. It's the way that you get your first job. It's the way that you feel confident as a citizen. So anything that we can do to promote people staying engaged, continuing to build foundational skills, continuing to work collaboratively with other students and teachers, and then being close to resources that will help them is necessary. How would I say your Rotary could help with that? I think the mentoring side of things that Colleen brought up earlier, expertise out in our community coming into our schools is our ticket. I am so impressed with what Sequim as a community has for resources, and we're not using them as well as we could. So we have to pull that down. And that's the conversation I'd want to have with you.
Great, thanks, Regan. Nancy Rowe from Pacific Northwest National Labs, the STEM program. Nancy.
Yes, hello, Regan. Thank you so much for joining. And so as she just said, I am with Pacific Northwest National Lab, and specifically in my area, we are looking at the internships for students for when they are at their community colleges or at their universities. And so you hit on a really pivotal point when you said we need to let the students know at middle school. And so one of the things that we find difficult sometimes is getting that piece where we could come to the school and share, here's some options you have at national labs, because I don't think students ever think about that they could go to a national lab for an internship, but there are we have 17 national labs in United States, and we all have spots for students, whether they're at a community college in the more technical fields or whether they're at a university. And so really what I'd like to ask is that a possibility for those national labs to be able to visit the schools, and I know we have Nalani here too. She's in Sequim as well, and she's one of our earth scientists, and so she would be a great resource as well. I just tossed her out there. But so my question really is how do we get to that piece where we can visit with the schools without, in a collaborative, effective way?
So I'd say to you that we have to work on that from the school side. What I hear from our staff routinely is, yes, we want resources to come in. We can't wait to have, for instance, we had a career day in Sequim in the past pre-COVID, and we're going to bring that back this year. So that'd be the first step in coming in, but that's a one-off, right? I think we need to have the persistent nudge over and over in a student's developmental cycle through middle school about possibilities, and then go into high school as well. And so we have to find the sustainable way that this is routine. And you know what that takes? Coordination. And so when I was talking earlier about we need paid positions in our schools to do this, we need the coordinators who can be the outreach liaisons to organize all of these routine visits, mentoring matches, volunteer opportunities. We've got so many people willing to say yes on both sides of the coin out in the community and in our schools. We just don't have the glue in the middle to make it happen. So that's where we have to put some investment, and that's what schools are all about. We need to use our investments and be good stewards, show the product and the results, and then I think people will have thumbs up to say yes.
Great, thanks, Regan. Rebecca Miller had a question that she put in the chat. Rebecca?
Sorry about that. I couldn't find that little button. I do not have children, but I will say that I hear a lot that children are or students are no longer taught critical thinking. And I think especially in this age of misinformation, could you speak to that? My guess is that you would say, yes, they do, but are there specifics that you could speak to in that?
Well, I just like to be a realist, and I appreciate your question. Should the schools be producing educational opportunities every day that promote critical thinking? Absolutely. Do we need more professional development so that happens with quality assurance? Yes. So I'm just going to give you a little scenario about what I think happens. Out there in the private business world, if you have a business that's producing, we'll just call them widgets, you can have quality assurance measures because you're producing those one right after another. You use the same machinery to produce them all. You inspect them. Your quality assurance pretty high, I bet. In schools, we aren't producing widgets, we've got children. And so the children have experiences every day. They have developmental cycles they go through. They have divorce, they have accidents, they have successes and celebrations. They have loss of a grandparent. It's like this sometimes. And I think that what happens in schools is even if we have the teachers who are so well professionally developed, they have critical thinking experiences every day, sometimes we don't have the match because the students don't come with a mindset to receive it, have a readiness to do it. So that's why it's on us to make sure that these experiences happen all the time. So when the students have that window of readiness, security, so they can focus, we are there with it. And I think we have to develop with more certainty that happens in classrooms every day. We've all known the best teacher we ever had. That teacher is doing that routinely all the time. We have teachers who are new. We've got to develop it with them. We have teachers who have had experiences, especially through COVID, where it was hard to deliver because we had remote hybrid school. We've got to redevelop it now that we're back in person. So I'm not making excuses, just being real. It is absolutely a requirement that we have critical thinking. We have to develop its certainty to be used.
Nalani has had a question in the chat.
Yeah, I just wanted to check about that career day, if there's a projected date or where we can look for events scheduled that we could try to start coordinating on.
I don't have a date for it, and I'm hopeful that we're going to have one both at the middle school level this year and at the high school. But how about this? When I do know that, I'll make sure that Colleen has that information so she can push it out through this group.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Terrific. Thank you, Regan. Yeah, we have almost 8,000 people that receive our newsletters. So it's a pretty good resource to get information out. And we love to allow other partners to be able to share their information through that platform. Jim McIntyre has his hand raised. He's a former port commissioner. I took his slot, I guess, a couple iterations ago. And he also is a former county commissioner. Jim.
Regan, welcome to this beautiful part of the country.
Thank you.
I come originally from Georgia, which is on the same longitude as Maine, just about, but good ways south. So
I lived in Kingsland, Georgia for 2.5 years.
Okay, well, you're familiar with the bugs and the
Yes.
humidity and all that down there. My question, well, a little bit of background. Additionally, I'm head of a business organization in Port Angeles. One of the positions that we took early on in the response to COVID was to reopen the schools to in-person learning just as soon as we possibly could, once we knew more about what we were dealing with. You know, there's a great deal of uncertainty at the beginning of that, of course, understandable. But question deals with sort of an after-action review of how the educational establishment, not only here in Clallam County, but in the state as a whole, responded to COVID, tried to keep things going. And in particular, there's a close interconnect between employees being able to be available to their employer and schools being open for business in some fashion, et cetera, and so forth. I don't need to elaborate on that. I think we all get that. Is there, or has there been a detailed look at how we could have done things better given the uncertainties that existed, which, you know, diminished over time, of course? And is it available to the public or can it be made available to the public if that's still in process? I'm very interested in learning the right lessons from how we responded either well or poorly to the situation that we've all gone through over the last several years.
Well, this is going to be a product of me being a newcomer, I think. I'm not familiar with an organized look back at how the process worked for making those decisions and prioritizing open school versus a hybrid model. What I will say is I've had a couple of informal conversations with other superintendents from this region. And what I've heard is that Clallam County actually stands out in the entire state as being an area where getting back to in-person school was highly prioritized and looked very different than those in the I-5 corridor. And so there is some level of pride that I'm hearing that that effort was made. Regarding the need for the workforce to be back in their positions and needing school to be there as a support for that, here. One thing I'll say is my prior experience with COVID was, of course, in Maine, and Maine did an excellent job of funding daycare resource so that parents could go back to work, and the schools were expected to facilitate it. So that was my experience as a superintendent, was facilitating how we develop not just daycare outside of schools, but having our schools, which did go back in person quite quickly, be a place where we could support those needs. So I do see schools, as I said earlier, an economic driver. And when you take on that responsibility, you have to support the workforce. So I think it's critical that be in our mind. If I hear of a formal review, I will get back to Colleen with that as well and share what I can about it.
Great.
Great. Thank you, Regan. You mentioned earlier about kids with behavioral problems. What percentage of I suppose every kid has a behavioral problem at one point in their life, but generally speaking, what percentage of the kids do have behavioral issues that the school district is regularly having to deal with? Is that 5%? Is it 10%? What would your estimate be?
I actually would say we'll define it as behavioral challenges that prevent a student from accessing their education effectively. Okay. And I would say it is down in the low range, probably around 5%. Mm-hmm. What I will say is that the percentage for staff sometimes and sometimes parents feels larger because the impact can be significant on a classroom or another group of students when there are issues. Mm-hmm. But actually student for student, it's quite low.
Well, that's good. That's good to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
now, there are some other behavioral issues I'll share that are behaviors that we need to get a handle on. So vaping, for instance, at the high school, that's just a distracting, addicting type behavior that we feel we really need to work on. It's more pervasive than we would hope for, but it's not necessarily impacting the students getting their education.
Okay. And how many kids are vaping in the high school?
Well, I don't know the number because, of course, when we try to catch vaping, what happens? We have scatter and people can be quite tight-lipped. But I'm actively working with our student board representatives. They actually are concerned about it as well. And so we're going to be doing some surveys to get a handle on what percentages we are looking at.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Regan, for joining us today. It's really been enlightening. And I, for one, am really excited about having you in this role. I think we've got a lot of new blood in the community that have, with Susie and Matt and Regan, there's a lot of energy here. And I'm so excited to see what progress we can make and partner with anyone that needs any support. So with that, everyone, I think we'll call it a morning, and thank you very much for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Colleen.
Thank you.